Welcome back to another episode of A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci. I'm excited to launch another episode for you all. I'm Vincent Lanci, speaker, coach, and author of the book Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption. When I was 21 years old, I was the victim of a hit-and-run accident while walking home from a friend's birthday. After coming out of a coma and suffering from a traumatic brain injury, or you may know of as a TBI, I soon realized that it was time to put my mental health on a very high pedestal. This transformative experience has led me to create a podcast that is all things mental health. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate the show 5 stars and continue listening by subscribing. Would it benefit you to hear from mental health professionals and influencers? Would it also add value to your life to hear mental health advocates share their authentic stories, speak about their mental health and the issues they face, and how they actively combat them? If you answered yes to any of those questions, you came to the right place. I would like to start by congratulating you for making your mental health a priority. On this episode, I am happy to introduce my guest, Tommy Dahlborg. Tommy is another product of networking and was connected from someone you met a few episodes ago in Tracy. Tommy is a family man and a mental health advocate. He is doing his best to play a part in breaking down the walls of stigma surrounding mental health. He truly believes in the power of being real and sharing your struggles and allowing others to just know you're not alone. This belief has led him to create his own podcast called the Strength Through Vulnerability podcast. He will talk about his experiences, podcast, and so much more. And even though he is a New England Patriots fan, I still had to have him on the show because of all the great work he's doing. Allow me to please introduce Tommy Dahlborg. Tommy, thank you for coming on the show.
Vincent, thank you so much, man. You had to throw out that Patriots thing, but hey, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Would you mind please introducing yourself to our listeners a little more and sharing your story before we dive in and get going? And also, please do share your role relating to mental health.
Yeah, definitely. So like Vincent said, I'm Tommy Dahlborg, and I'm 24 years old. Graduated college a couple of years ago, and the reason I say that is because a lot of my story started coming to fruition in my senior year in college. So I lived with anxiety for as long as I knew, but I couldn't actually put the word anxiety to it until maybe 7th grade. And I had this conversation with my dad. I remember it was on a car ride. I say to him, I'm like, Dad, I think I'm anxious. And, my dad being incredibly loving, we have a great relationship. He says what he says was meant the best way possible. He said to me, Tommy, don't worry about it. It's all in your head. And I think that anybody who's dealt with anxiety has heard that. You know that it's coming from a good place. But if it was possible to just not worry about it, that's probably what I would do, right? And so years go on from that point, and it continues to compound. I continue to struggle with more anxiety. I get to senior year in college, and all of a sudden, I'm at this point of my hands are basically trembling all the time, no matter what I do. The anxiety was just so bad. And so it wasn't until I was in this relationship with this girl my senior year, so an ex-girlfriend of mine, it was actually a toxic relationship, which propelled me to seeking out help. So she actually shared a little bit about herself, talked about how she struggled with anxiety, how she had seen a mental health professional. And that's really what motivated me to go and do the same thing. Her telling me that and being vulnerable with me allowed me to see that it's okay if I go and get help. And so, it's been a couple years since then. I've sought out help from a psychiatrist. I see a counselor now. And like you mentioned, I'm just doing what I can to help break down these walls and make it a common conversation to talk about these mental struggles.
Well, I appreciate your bravery and your willingness to share your story because it does go a long way, as we know. And thank you for emphasizing that it is okay to see somebody if you need to, because the leaps and bounds you can make from just doing it can pay major dividends. So, Tommy, on each episode, I share the mental health story of someone who is famous because I want to let you, the listeners, know you are not alone. I want you to understand that even though someone looks like they're healthy from the outside, they may not be on the inside too. And for today's episode, I will introduce the mental health-related story of comedian and actor Wayne Brady. You may have seen him in a number of ways, including an actor, game show host, comedian, singer, producer, usually happy roles. This is a perfect example of how, even though someone may be laughing, they may also be struggling too. I would like to start the article with some advice he gave to those battling depression or their own struggles in, quote, "It took me a while to get my stuff together to go, you know what? If you're not happy, you have to do something about it. Just to admit that you are feeling this way is a huge step. To claim that, to say, why do I feel dark? Why do I feel unhappy? Let me do something about this." The tragic passing of Robin Williams, who battled depression, was very hard for Brady to deal with. Brady had revealed that he hit rock bottom on his 42nd birthday, recalling, quote, "I was there by myself in my bedroom and I had a complete breakdown. Just go ahead and imagine for yourself a brother in his underwear in his room. You got snot, and that birthday was the beginning of, okay, I've got to make a change." I will end this write-up with one more powerful quote he delivered, there were so many in these articles I read. And he said, quote, "It's difficult for men in general, I think, because of just the way we're raised. We feel any of the negative emotions or that dark cloud settle on you, and you feel like you need to cry out or speak to somebody about it. And nope, I'm not going to do that because I'm a man." That's what you're taught. That's how you are programmed, and that's what kills us. Tommy, what do you take away from this story on mental health?
Man, there's a lot in there, a lot of good stuff, a lot of good stuff. I think the first thing I think of is just how grateful I am that Wayne came out and shared these really vulnerable parts of him, these really difficult things. And, you know, it's important for us to have these conversations in order to break down those walls to, again, like I said earlier, make these conversations normal. And it helps so much more when somebody who's got a major following like him is doing the same. And I think you see more and more people in positions like his doing so, which is just amazing. I also love that, he came out and he kind of gave a call to action. And it just made me think about how, at the end of the day, support from loved ones is huge. It's so important and is many times needed. With that said, at the end of the day, it comes down to you to go and decide that you need to do something. And I'm just really glad that he said that when he was like, you know what? If you're not happy, you have to do something about it. And that the power in claiming it, like he said, is huge. He brings up such a great point, a powerful point about being a man and having it be difficult to come out and talk about these things. And so I really think about how amazing it is for people like you, people like me, other men to talk about these things, because it is different. All of a sudden, I have this podcast called Strength Through Vulnerability. Men have been programmed for ages to not be vulnerable, to put a mask on. And so it's just great to see him tearing down these walls, man. It's a crazy story, crazy good story.
Yeah, I'm very inspired by your story as well. And unfortunately, there's a lot of stigma because people won't even speak about it at work because they may think they'll get fired. And that's just so terrible, because what comes up at times is you break your hand, you take the time to rehab it. You break your foot, you take the time to rehab it, your finger, so on. You're going through some depression or some anxiety, you can't take 2 or 3 weeks out to get back on track and prevent it from being a lifelong occurrence. There was no research or anybody talking about it for us growing up. And as far as being a man, it's a great point. Kevin Love was one of these stories, the NBA player at one point I've done, and he talked about how his dad said, you're a man, you mask those emotions growing up. So you doing your part, me doing mine, and working with everybody else to normalize the conversation is something that we are on our way to doing, but we've only just begun, unfortunately. But I think it's a great segue here to the main event. I'm really excited to learn your story, Tommy. On each episode, my guest and I go over this series of 6 questions, which only slightly varies depending on if the guest is speaking on their own or others' mental health. You ready to go, Tommy?
I'm so ready. Let's do it.
Great. So many would agree that the more common or at least talked about types of mental disparities are mood disorders, anxiety disorders, or schizophrenia disorders. What areas do you come across the most?
It's a great question. And I want to start off by saying that all kinds of mental challenges are so important. They're all equally important and need to be talked about. And with that said, I come across mood disorders and anxiety disorders the most. And I think a lot of that is because those are what I've struggled with. I'm somebody who's struggled with anxiety. I actually didn't mention earlier, I don't think, but I have OCD,
Okay.
struggle with things like intrusive thoughts. Um, and so with myself struggling with those or having those challenges and being very interested in it and wanting to help, I've naturally had conversations with more people who struggle from similar things.
Yeah.
Um, I would say too that depression is, of course, a big deal. And I've had some incredibly powerful conversations with people about depression. A guy just recorded with me. The episode with him is coming out this coming Saturday. And he shared how, he wanted to kill himself at one point. And it was really cool for him to, it's not really cool that he felt that way, but it's really cool that he mentioned it to me and felt comfortable enough to say that, because unbeknownst to him, in fourth grade, I actually felt the same way. I put a belt around my neck and luckily didn't do anything with it. But for some reason, fourth grade Tommy was in so much pain that he just wanted things to end. And so I do think that I come across those areas the most because they're nearest to me. But again, that it goes without saying that they're all incredibly important. And I'm just glad to be able to learn more and more about each.
Yeah. So when this happened in elementary school, was there any mental health discussion at all in your health curriculum or school at all? Did you have any idea what was going on in your head?
I had no idea, man. None at all. I really wish I did. I just had a conversation with an amazing guy a couple weeks ago who was also on the podcast, and he's doing work to bring social and emotional learning into the school system
Okay.
so that kids can learn how to, like, first off, recognize what their brain's doing when they're getting these feelings, and then how to control these feelings or how to properly manage them. And that's something that I'm sure you, being very similar in age as me, and I didn't experience in school at all. So I think it's really important.
I think that's really what inspired me to begin my mental health children's series. We're working on a series of 7 different lessons right now, and it's to just let these kids know it's okay to have emotions, it's okay to have feelings, and it's okay to see somebody if you need to. It shouldn't be looked down upon because you can accomplish greatness despite having adversities mental health wise. And again, with more conversations like ours, we will continue to do our best to breaking down those stigmas. But you've had a lot of defining moments throughout your mental health history. You've been talking about it bravely, and a lot of people are going to relate to that. When was that moment that you decided, hey, I'm going to start taking a stance against mental health? I'm going to do this as a career, passion, something more. I'm going to be an advocate.
It's a great question. And so I'll start off by saying that I'm not a mental health professional. However, after doing my own work, after seeing the psychiatrist and going and seeing a counselor and learning more and more about me and how challenging things were for me, I knew a lot of people were out there dealing with similar things. And I was in a position of, okay, I didn't go to school to be a social worker or a psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever. So what can I do to help people? And it just so happened to be that I had been thinking about starting a podcast for a little while, but I didn't know what I wanted to talk about. I couldn't pin it down. And then all of a sudden, these things just came together, and I was like, oh my gosh, of course. I talk about this thing that I deal with every day, that I learn more about every day, and it allows me to use my voice to allow people to know that they're not alone. There's other people out there struggling with this stuff too.
I love it. So how far along are we with your podcast series?
Yeah, man. It's so I started in January 2020. So a good year to start talking about mental health.
I think interesting enough, I don't know if I was right around there too that this series launched. I want to say December or January. It's great to see you making such a difference on that show. I wanted to make sure we spoke about it on this platform because the more resources that whoever's listening on has, it will pay that much more of a reward for them. So I do appreciate your service creating your podcast show. But what advice can you give to our listeners, Tommy, from what you have experienced as what may be considered a potential early sign that, hey, something may be up, I may be developing a form of mental health disparity?
Mm, another really good question. And, I think there's a lot that goes into this. I think the number one thing I would say is to when we're in our own heads, I think a lot of us naturally are self critics. We naturally we feel things that don't feel good and we criticize ourselves for it. We think there's something wrong with us immediately. And there might be something going on there. Of course, that's definitely a possibility. But my encouragement is to go into your brain with self compassion, go in with some curiosity. Try to ask yourself the questions, okay, I have this feeling. And what is this feeling saying about me? Why do I have this? Let's try to get to the root of that. And of course, and in many cases, you do need some professional help in order to do that. And I think one of the best ways to tell if you need professional help, if there's really something else going on, is how is what's going on in your head impacting your day to day life? Are you staying in bed all day? Are you not able to accomplish simple tasks? Is your motivation completely gone? Those kinds of questions I think are really important. And then, of course, being around people who love you and care because they can speak into your life too and help you see those things.
Emphasizing a lot of great stuff here, Tommy. Having a support group is essential to maintaining an as optimal of a mental health as you will. Having people to not just tell you what you want to hear, but tell you what you need to hear. People who are there for you when the peaks and valleys alternate.
Mm.
But I'm excited for this answer for you because I know it's going to be a good one. If you could pick three, and I say only three because I want the three most important things our listeners can do on a daily or short-term basis to improve their mental health, what can you offer?
Man. So, first off, I think everybody is very different. So, these three things I give out might not be the best thing for you, but they definitely work for me. And I will say that when things are tough, get into the habit of grabbing your journal. I think a lot of us talk about journaling, and there's a lot of talk about journaling daily. And I think that journaling daily can be very powerful. What I have found works best for me is not having the stress or like the extra thing on my to do list of needing to write in my journal every single day,
Mhm.
but rather knowing that, okay, when things are tough, when my mind's cloudy, or when there's just something really on my heart that needs to be talked about, I always reach for that journal now. And it's so therapeutic to put those words, get them out of your brain and onto some paper. So that would be number one for sure. Number two, and this is something that can be short term and long term, and that's meditate. I've found that, I started trying to meditate back senior year in college when I was really starting to learn a lot about what was going on in my brain. And it was hard. And I think for so many, there's just misconceptions about what meditation is. And for me, what it's kind of become is really just this place where, I close my eyes, I focus on some breathing. And instead of trying to think about nothing, which I think is what many people believe it is,
Yeah.
it's more so, it's been watching from a third person view the thoughts in my head, almost like they're clouds drifting in and just looking at them, being like, okay, that's what I'm thinking about. Maybe that's causing some anxiety, but I can let it go. And that's that process. And
Yeah,
for me,
I love that. Not to cut you off, but
no,
that
you're
was the
good.
same thing with me where I had unrealistic expectations for meditation. Thought it was gonna be this magical drug type thing where I'm just gonna feel great, and you build on it, you do a minute, a minute, a minute, and now I'm at the
Mm,
point where, like you're saying, with journaling, rather than doing it every day, for me it works best as that time and place initiative that will
mm.
transform my day. But those are two outstanding ones. What's your third one, Tommy?
Thanks, man. Yeah, I would say my third one is going back to part of the question or the answer I gave for the last question is talking to someone. And that initially doesn't need to be a mental health professional. I think so. I live with my little sister right now.
Okay.
We have a really close relationship. So I'm 24, she's 21. And she's somebody who I know I can trust and who I know loves me. And of course, I love her too.
Yeah.
And so when things are difficult, sometimes we'll just go on our porch and I'll just share whatever's on my heart, whatever I'm struggling with. And even if she hasn't been in that situation or hasn't dealt with those thoughts, whatever it is, she can empathize with me. She can just be present with me. And so I really preach the importance of talking to somebody, hence the podcast being called Strength Through Vulnerability. You got to share those things. So that would be my number 3.
Yeah, I really do enjoy, again, going back to support group. Part of my, which you will read about, you'll have to, of course, get you a copy when the
Yes.
mental health resources come out. People underestimate the power of talking,
Mm,
again, because of the thousands of stigmas maybe associated with expressing your feelings, in addition to those 1,000 being a man, the outlook.
mm,
But you got to get it off your chest, or you're going to carry it around, and it's going to slowly tear away that mental health.
mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think if I was to add one more thing to that, it's just that the reason people don't want to talk about these things is because they're afraid that when they share these difficult things that they'll be judged, they won't be loved or accepted anymore. And I want to empathize with people who feel that, because we all do. That is a legitimate fear. And that's why you want to make sure that you're talking to the right person. You're talking to that person who loves you, who you trust. And that's why a lot of times it ends up being a mental health professional, someone who isn't going to say no to you or say bye to you when you bring up something difficult, because they're trained to do that.
And I think out of those short-term initiatives with repetition, and if they work for you, they can become long-lasting, long-term initiatives, which I'm
Mm.
excited to learn more about from you right here. What are 2 longer-term commitments that our listeners can make to create a healthier mindset?
Absolutely. So I want to reiterate what you just said. Those 3 things I think can be short term and long term for sure. And they're in my plans, my personal plans to be long term.
It's great, though, because you offered those, and those are solutions that people who are listening right now, you can click pause, go grab your journal. If something's on your chest, you can click play again and hear the
Absolutely.
rest. That's amazing, Tommy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Vincent. And so I would say these answers aren't super sexy, but they're good. They're important. And the long term one is, if you find after talking to perhaps someone you love, who's a family member that you trust, if you find that you still need some more help, seek out that professional help. That's that's huge. I don't see myself not seeing a professional again. And I want to make sure I said that right. What I mean is, I see myself seeing somebody for the rest of my life. Maybe it'll be by year, or like maybe it'll be twice a year at some point. It doesn't need to be every single week, but that's a long-term solution, a long-term thing that can really help you. And this is probably the one that is overlooked often, but it's get some sleep. Like, we're all so busy, man. And I know that you're an entrepreneur. You've got 2 podcasts. You have 1 podcast about entrepreneurship. I have a bunch of stuff going on my end too. So many reasons to not get sleep. However, I don't know about you, but when I get the sleep my body needs, which is different for everybody, for me, it's usually about the 8 hours. I wake up and I feel motivated to basically tackle anything. And when I don't get that sleep that I need, that's really when I feel, I don't want to use the word weak or weaker, but that's really when I think my anxiety and OCD is at its finest.
Resting your body and resting your mind are essential. I am a firm advocate on mental health breaks during the day. You can call them regular breaks. You don't have to call them mental health breaks, but breaks each day. And only thing I'm real hard on myself is giving myself that 1 day a week. We obviously have 1,000 things on our to-do list to get done, but
Mm.
I find that when I take that break, I come back sharper, I come back ready, and I actually am more efficient in my work. We're not superheroes. We have to rest and give yourself a mental health day. You gave a call to action on if you think you need a therapist or a psychiatrist, someone to speak to, do it. I'll follow that with, I challenge you listening on to give yourself that mental health day, that day to do something that you truly enjoy, something that makes you happy, because you deserve it. And you can't let life pass you by. Like we spoke about, you have to be in the present a little bit. And it's a great way to do so.
Amen, man. I think
Yeah.
that's great.
Well, Tommy, you're doing a lot right now. We heard a little bit about your podcast. Let's continue to look into the future with our listeners. What are some ways you plan on raising awareness for the importance of mental health in the future?
Oh man, that's a fantastic question and it's an exciting one. I think oh man, so I plan on continuing my podcast and continuing to get better every single week, have more people on there sharing their stories, breaking down stigma. That really excites me. I love doing that. One thing that I've been thinking about that can be really powerful, and I've been trying to get into the college that I went to, but I want to speak at schools, colleges, high schools, wherever, to the student body in general, and especially male athletes. Athletes as a whole, too, but male athletes, because I grew up playing sports, and as we've touched on, being a guy, period, it's tough to talk about these things, and being an athlete on top of that can be very tough because you're like everybody's telling you rub some dirt on it, suck it up, all these things that we're trained to be that don't help us from a mental health perspective. So I plan on doing some speaking in the future, and who knows from there, but continuing to work, man, and make connections.
I'm looking forward to seeing how you grow this brand. You're doing an excellent job at starting it. You're breaking down the stigmas, and it's admirable how you want to travel around and speak to kids. I'm a firm believer, and that's what I'm narrowing down to, is influencing children while they still have the ability to be influenced in the right
Mm,
direction. There's an abundance of information out there, which is a good and bad thing, but getting these kids the correct information is way more than half the battle. But
mm.
Tommy, thank you so much for coming on. I know our listeners are going to see all the value in your episode today. I really enjoyed how you started by giving such an honest testimonial, starting when you were in fourth grade, that you were an athlete, walking through relatable situations for our listeners, because that is going to hit connecting points for them. I loved your advice for the short-term initiatives, because those are things that they can do right now. But it is time for the last word here, Tommy. And I also do this in my other podcast series, What It's Really Like to Be an Entrepreneur, as well, because I want the listeners to really get to know the guests I bring on. Is there something that you would like to share with everybody listening on that we did not get to touch on yet today?
Mm. I would say that it's not necessarily something we didn't touch on, but I just want to reaffirm that whatever you're dealing with, you're not alone. There's other people out there. Find someone you can trust and talk to them, share these difficult things, and just know the human experience. It's difficult, man. It's difficult and it's complex. So try to show yourself some grace while you're going through it.
I love that. Would you mind please sharing your professional social media website, podcast name once again, any ways for our listeners to follow your endeavors, crest your services?
Of course, man. Thank you very much for the opportunity to do so. So you can find me on Instagram. I have a personal Instagram. It's at Tommy Dahlborg Jr. Um, I'll have you spell that out in the description of the podcast, so I don't have to do that here. And then I'm actually just getting started on a Facebook page and an Instagram page for the podcast itself. And that is at Strength Through Vulnerability. And Through is spelled THRU. I know a few people have had a hard time finding it because they're spelling it differently. But that's also the name of the podcast, Strength Through Vulnerability. Through is THRU. So go check that out on whatever podcast platform you prefer to use. It means a lot to me, and you guys rock. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I'll have to remind you to send me that link so I can put it onto the episode description so our listeners can tackle that episode back to back with this one and improve their mental health a whole lot.
Yes.
But it is social media time for the show, and we are also on whichever platform you like to use. We're at A Mental Health Break on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, and we're at Podcasts by Lanci, so you get updates from both this show and What It's Really Like to Be an Entrepreneur. Of course, my handles are at Vincent A. Lanci on all social media and YouTube, and my website is vincentalanci.com. If you check out my books, DM me. I would love to hear from you. We have Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption, and How to Transform Your Mindset When the Norm is Changed. Both are on Amazon now. If you enjoyed today's episode, please continue listening and rate A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci 5 stars. I work hard to find value-delivering guests for you on each episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you all on the next episode of A Mental Health Break with Vincent A. Lanci.